What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here, and I am super excited to be making today's video. Going to be going over patch 2.4 version 2. Now basically, the big takeaway here is that the devs have listened to the feedback from the community, and they've shifted the direction quite a bit, kind of twisting the throttle a little bit more on making some substantial changes to actually shift the meta. That's the key takeaway here, is that I can think of so many different scenarios of where some new meta is going to appear. So Charge Strike Amazon with Infinity in an Amazon Spear, maybe a Faith Mercenary. Act 5 Merc using some really weird combination of maybe like Plague and Eth Head Striker, or Lawbringer for Decrep proc and Last Wish for Might Aura, or maybe Lawbringer paired with Eth Head Striker, again for like a max damage setup. There's so many cool things you can now do with dual-wielding mercenaries, and a lot of these crazy synergy changes like multi-shot Boazon and Strafe Boas might actually be the new Kingpins in Chaos Sanctuary. Vista Heavens, Holy Bolt now damages everything. There's just so many awesome changes, and I'm super excited because I did recently release a community poll where about 70% of over 10,000 people that participated in that vote wanted more substantial changes, and that's what we're getting in this blog post. So a lot of stuff to talk about. Again, I'll have timestamps in the description below, so if you guys want to navigate, just feel free to use them. But let's jump in. Mostly going to focus on the character changes, but I will touch on everything. So the first major topic that I want to cover is the changes that have been made to Uber Diablo. Going to skip the ladder section. You guys can read it for yourself. I'll have the blog post linked below. It's largely the same. The only thing they've really changed was they added this ability to move stuff from a seasonal stash to non-ladder kind of stats page. That's not too exciting, but Diablo clone changes are very good. They did ask for your feedback, so if you guys want to sound off in the comment section below with anything you guys would maybe want to tweak. But essentially, prior to this patch, you would have to pool together as a community a handful of SOJs and then sell them all on the same IP address. So you had to use an external program to make sure that you're all on the same IP address instance, and then collectively sell all those SOJs to then spawn Diablo clone only on that instance or IP address. Very archaic, trash way of having endgame content. Now, with that being said, it was introduced years ago in an attempt to try and combat duped SOJs, but this is basically a reworking of that idea, so you no longer have to be involved in like that secret special community to get an anti-charm. Essentially, they're going to still have the same concept of trying to sell like 80 plus to like 120 SOJs to then spawn Diablo clone on a specific server, but it works regional based. So once you've pooled together a certain amount of SOJs and you sell them, Diablo clone will spawn on the North America region, or the Europe or Asia region, whatever one it is. So this is going to basically accomplish a couple of things. One is it will slightly devalue the price of an anti-charm. They'll no longer be sold for eBay for like 250 bucks a pop, which that's a good thing. It will lessen the value or drop SOJ value a little bit. I don't really care either way. I mean, it's kind of nice that it's not worth as much because it is a pretty popular ring. And this will allow more people to gain access to the anti-charm. Now, I personally, like if I had my choice, I would rather it be like a very rare consumable item. So say it's like a Diablo clone town portal scroll that drops, that's like the rarity of a Zodrune. Then you right click it, you go into like some locked Chaos Sanctuary, and then you fight Diablo clone that way. So it's kind of like adding to the grind versus as long as you're just playing and you're lucky and you happen to be on the time when people sell enough SOJs, Diablo clone will spawn and whatever. So it's not that it's horrible. Like I think this is largely improved, but I would rather see that take on it in the future as opposed to just once 100 plus SOJs are sold, everybody who happens to be online in that region gets a shot at killing Diablo clone, because it's going to severely devalue the price of an anti. But with that being said, again, I think it's better that more people will have a chance to get one versus being part of like the exclusive club to actually get an anti-charm, because I had one on ladder, which was actually a gift. So I didn't actually participate in the crazy pooling of SOJs. So I think largely this is a better improvement, but again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree. So moving on to some of the character skill class changes, going to start off first with the Amazon. They increased the animation speed for Impale. Now, it got a 30% bump, which I did cover in a previous video, the Fend Amazon, and I basically used the combination of Fend, the evade skills, and then used Jab for single target instead of Impale because it was a super slow skill. So I think that this improvement is a good thing. Again, I'll have to test it, but Using jab on a single target actually worked really well, but overall I thought the Fenzon was actually one of the most underrated build changes or character tweaks, because with some relatively cheap gear like Fortitude, I know like a low rune, but in all honesty, like G-Face, Laying a Hand, String of Ears, Triple Shield, Death Hone Sedan, Duress or Fortitude Body Armor, and being eventually Breath of the Dying when you get to the endgame setup, it was a very powerful build that had really good clear speed, and then you had the extra survivability of the evade skills. So you weren't quite like a Zealot with max block, but I do think that it was a great character to play. So the fact that they've made Impale a little bit better, that's really cool. They tweaked Plague Javelin to essentially do more damage, so the duration is no longer fixed at 3 seconds like it was in the previous version of PTR. I'm going to be honest that I'm not really a big fan of the poison Javazon at all. Like, I did watch some other content creators mess around with like Bramble, Plague Mercs, Poison Faceted Monarchs and whatnot, and I don't think that it was that crazy of a build. Like, I think just a standard Javazon was performing much better. So I mean, it'd be interesting to, I guess, maybe I'll test this out now, but I'm not really too excited. The two skills that I am most excited for is Multiple Shot and Strafe and Guided Arrow receiving additional damage synergy buffs. Now, Strafe originally had 3/4 damage, similar to Multi-Shot. They changed it in the first iteration of PTR, so it just started at flat weapon damage, and it worked really well with good gear on Player's Aid and Chaos Sanctuary. Now, again, it kind of suffers from that Ozone problem of needing the best possible gear to have moderate clear speed, but it was definitely an improvement. Now the fact that they've added a 5% and 10% physical damage per level synergy, on top of it, I think Strafe is going to be very powerful, especially when you pair it with the Amulet Atma's Scarab. When you reach a max ice breakpoint, you constantly proc amp damage, so I think that Strafe is going to be a sleeper build. And then Multi-Shot, that's kind of like, that's a whole debate in itself. Multi-Shot versus Strafe, you have like the pro Strafe crowd, the pro Multi-Shot crowd, but the fact that it's also receiving a damage synergy buff, 12% per level, again 20 skill points synergizing it from Guided Arrow, and the fact that Guided Arrow synergizes with Multi-Shot and in reverse, that's going to be a very powerful like single target and group setup as well. Is it going to be like a Player's 8 Chaos Wrecking Machine? Possibly, because that's a lot of extra damage, but I think that's almost fair because the Boson has sucked for so long, so hopefully we don't have any fun police wanting to nerf it. Unless it's like ridiculously overpowered, but it's going to be nice to see Boson finally shine. And then they reduced the cooldown on Immolation Arrow. So this is one of these skills that I was like most disappointed with. And I still actually don't even understand why it has a cooldown on it in general, because Freezing Arrow, super powerful skill, more powerful than Immolation Arrow, freezes monsters, make them immobile, and there's no cooldown on it. So why does Immolation Arrow, a fire skill that's weaker, have a cooldown on it? I always hated that, but the fact that they've now reduced that cooldown might almost be able to repetitively spam it. Like, not quite obviously like the same extent of Freezing Arrow, but I do think this is improvement as well. I would really like to test out a hybrid Boson setup between Immolation Arrow and Freezing Arrow using Mist with 100% Pierce. So overall, if I was to rate the Amazon changes, I would probably give them like 9.5, almost 10 out of 10. Really like the stuff that I'm seeing for the Amazon. Probably gonna rock a Boson at some point in the first ladder. So next up we have the Assassin that has only received 2 very minor changes. So basically they've added a yards calculation to the tooltip of Wake of Inferno, and they increased the attack rating on Blade Fury. Now, talking about Blade Fury and Blade Sentinel first for a little bit, that's a horrible build in my opinion. I tried messing around with it on stream with the best possible gear. It is so dependent on attack rating, and the skills are so clunky that I just think it's a dog shit build, to be entirely honest. I know some other content creators kind of were thinking that the increased damage was going to be super OP. It's horrible. The attack rating buff is a slight improvement, but there's just so many better choices, and I even found messing around with the Blade Fury / Sentinel setup that you had better clear speed using Death Sentry as a substitute, so you might as well just go Death Sentry with Martial Arts, or Pure Trapsin, or Fire Trapsin using Death Sentry. I don't know, it's just a horrible build that I tried to do everything I could to make it work, and I wanted it to work. It's just super clunky and then super tied to, or too much dependent and tied to attack rating. Now with that being said, there is some pretty crazy rumored changes they're going to cover shortly, but being able to roll Plague and Claws, just imagine Trapsin with 2 claws, 3 open sockets that have +3 to Lightning Sentry, you roll Plague in them, You can use Claw Block. You have chance to proc lower res when you pair that with an Infinity Mercenary. More damage, the Cleansing Aura, the whole 9 yards. So I love the fact that you can now make Plague and Claws, and also in terms of martial arts builds like Claws of Thunder, getting that lower res proc paired with Griffins, paired with an Infinity Mercenary, should make for some more interesting setups for the Assassin. So not too much has been changed in terms of the actual character balancing, but I do think the Assassin was largely improved in the first iteration of PTR. Blade Fairy is awful. I just don't even know if that could be fixed just the way that it works, but Plague and Claws and some of the new martial arts and just traps in general being very good, I think the Assassin is in a pretty good place. So for the Barbarian, this is, gonna be honest, you guys know by now if you've been watching my channel for quite a bit, this is my least favorite character in Diablo 2, but they've made numerous changes, I think, to improve the quality of life, as well as add some more viability to some of the builds. So I may, don't hold this against me, rock a Barbarian at some point during the ladder. So first I want to talk about leap attack. I am really excited about this. They've essentially added a splash effect when you land of an AoE radius damage effect. So it says 4.6 yards from leap attack and the damage scales per level. So we now have some form of AoE on a melee build in D2. There is literally almost no form of AoE outside of some really obscure builds like Orden that has a little bit of shock pulse. It kicks in using Stormlash for static field procs, or maybe a Whirlwind Barbarian if you consider it AoE. But the fact that leap attack was already massively improved, it was sped up, it wasn't like super slow, very cool tool to reposition your barb. But now that we're going to actually land and send out splash damage, that's really cool. They did say they made some improvements to the trajectory to make it a little bit smoother. I actually didn't think it was that. They talk about jerkiness or kind of like jankiness. I didn't think it was that bad. So the fact that they've improved even more, that's awesome. Again, like I really liked playing around with leap attack. I just didn't think it was more viable than just say swinging multiple hits really fast to frenzy or just whirlwinding through packs. So the fact that we get that extra bit of splash damage, that's gonna help out quite a bit. They did talk about having a minimum height, jump height, and duration for leap and leap attack. That might change a little bit how barbs will kind of use leap to stun for farming gold and Travangle, but overall, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Now, there's quite a few changes that were made to the masteries. So first, starting off with Sword Mastery is now called Blade Mastery, and it includes daggers. So I can't really think of too many uses where I would use a dagger on a Barbarian, but at least the option is there now. And for every single other mastery, they have increased the attack rating, like the base attack rating bonus, quite a bit. So 40% from 28 or 44% from 30. That's really good because the Barbarian really struggles from attack rating, or actually melee builds in general. Now the biggest change here is Throw Mastery. So I was able to snag a quick screenshot off of Reddit from someone who actually had fired up single player when they accidentally launched these patch notes today, and he showed a level 38 Throw Mastery, which from reading the tooltip, based on the chance of not consuming quantity and the critical strike, like every time you get double strike from crit strike from mastery, it will replenish a quantity. I think that it's essentially kind of negated any chance of losing out on durability, because that's like the biggest issue, or excuse me, quantity, not durability. That was the biggest issue when I was testing the throw barb, is just using Eth Lacerator and Eth Warstrike, you would just constantly run out of durability. Now it is interesting that they note here in the patch notes that the chance to not consume quantity is up to 50%. That screenshot that I grabbed said 95%, so maybe that's something they need to tweak in PTR, but overall, this is a massive improvement and should hopefully address some of the throw quantity issues with the Barbarian. So Barb is definitely my least favorite character, but I'm going to give these changes 9 out of 10. So moving from my least favorite character, we get to cover my favorite character in Diablo 2, the Druid. Now they've changed quite a bit originally from the first version of PTR, but a lot of those changes I think fell short. But fortunately, from what I'm reading, I think that they've addressed a lot of those kind of setbacks, or what was sort of holding the Druid back in general. Now the first major change that they've implemented for Armageddon is that you no longer require Hurricane as a synergy. So you don't need to invest into Arctic Blast, Cyclone Armor, Twister, Tornado, and Hurricane to get Armageddon. So freeing up that skill tree to allow you to invest other points is very important for a dedicated fire druid, because when you fully max out Get In, Volcano, Fissure, Molten Boulder, Firestorm, you just have like no skill points left. So you can at least now invest a couple points into like Summon Grizzly, Heart of Wolverine, Oak Sage, etc. So that's great. And Armageddon has always had amazing damage, but the biggest issue that this skill suffers from is it just never hits monsters. But it looks like they're trying to address that now by increasing the missile damage radius 33%, so 1/3 bigger. Again, in the future, like when I cover this in testing, I'll kind of compare between original Armageddon and the new one, but that's a pretty big increase. And then they have increased the missile drop rate by 30% as well. So hopefully this will equate to like telestomping and then actually hitting more monsters. So that's really key. Next up, we have summoning. Now, the changes that they made to the Summon Druid were very close. Like Ravens do a ton of damage, cold damage on Spirit Wolves for physically immune monsters, Dire Wolves do better damage, Summon Grizzly always did good damage, and they even buffed up its life even more. So I think with CTA and Oak Sage, you can get like 40,000 life on a Grizzly Bear now, so it will never die. But you can only choose one type of summon. That is no longer the case. And again, I was able to snag a screenshot off of Reddit, just seeing like the full army or the full zoo for the Druids. So Ravens, Spirit Wolves, Dire Wolves, and Summon Grizzly at the same time. If you pair this with a hard-hitting Mercenary, I think that we're going to see quite a bit of extra damage from the Druid. And it did actually just recently release a sort of guide video on how to play a Summon Druid through normal. Now that guide, honestly, is still completely applicable. The only difference between that video and this one is the fact that you can now summon additional summons. But just the combination of Spirit Wolves and Ravens, I was able to fly through normal. So, and it was decent in Nightmare, really started to slow down Hell difficulty, but getting that extra summon support, I think is going to help kind of make up for that kind of lack of damage in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, so that's awesome. And finally, we have these shape-shifting changes, so I am very excited to cover these. Originally, the first version of PTR, they kind of changed the way the attack speed calculation worked for shape-shifting, and the intent was to try and open up weapon choices for the shape-shifting Druid, because essentially in LOD, basically increased attack speed on your weapon was almost entirely responsible for your specific IS breakpoints, and they tried to change it so that only your standard Druid human shapeshifting, or excuse me, your standard Druid IS breakpoints would determine your shapeshifting breakpoints. And again, the intention was to increase weapon diversity. So instead of pretty much exclusively only seeing like Bariza, Windhammer, Ribcracker, Eth Tomb Reaver, Breath of the Dying on a shapeshifter, they wanted to open up other weapon choices. But they kind of ended up net nerfing shapeshifting in the process. So they've reverted back to that original calculation, but they've raised the attack speed cap from 75% to 150%. So they essentially doubled it. So this will require some interesting testing, but I really do think that there might be the potential to use some really wacky weapons, like maybe Ethereal Reaper's Toll with a Zod rune, between that increased IS cap from the Werewolf, and then also they increased the speed between attacks on Fury by 40%, and they added additional IS from Maul. I think that might open up some different weapon choices, so I think that's really cool. They also made some really nutty changes to the Werebears. So again, they doubled the IS cap, they've increased the damage again, and they've increased the defense value, and they've added additional defense bonus scaling per level procced with Maul, and then Maul also gains additional 3% attack speed per charge. So this, I think, is going to turn the Werebear into a sleeper build, because I released a Fireclaw variant setup that used Grief and Phoenix, fully maxed out Fireclaw, and then fully maxed out Maul, and I had like 20,000 damage between physical and fire. Now the fact that they're increasing the IS cap, adding increased additional damage, IS, defense level per bonus, I think the Werebear is going to be a sleeper build. And they also mentioned cannot be interrupted while performing attacks or skills. So this makes me think that with endgame gear, we might see a Werebear being a really viable Uber Tristram setup. So again, please let me know in the comment section below what you guys think of this. If any of you guys are watching our hardcore like Druid or shapeshifting players, because I think that we now have the chance to see shapeshifting builds match a Zealot. Before, they were just really high-end variants that were either squishy or didn't have damage or very slow, and I think that has been completely rectified. And if I'm going to rate the changes for the Druid, 11 out of 10. I love what I'm seeing and I cannot wait to test this stuff. So next up we have the Necromancer. Now there's not really a lot to talk about here. They essentially just tried to make Blood Golem and Fire Golem a little bit better by reducing the mana cost and increasing the damage. But unfortunately the Necromancer just really suffers from being too good. The combination of Clay Golem and the slowdown with Decrepify, or turning an Insight Rune Word into an Iron Golem for a standalone meditation aura, they're just too good to even consider using even these buffed up Blood Golems and Fire Golems. So I'm thinking here that maybe they were trying to focus on some of the lesser used skill sets, builds, stuff that we were kind of quote unquote bitching about the most in PTR, and that's probably why they didn't focus much on the Necromancer. But I don't really understand why they nerfed the Holy Fire from 2 to 1, because I wouldn't even use a Fire Golem if it had a level 20 Holy Fire aura. So maybe like the option here to increase the utility of the other ones is to nerf the existing ones, although I'm not a fan of nerfing. But really, the Necro is largely in a good place. They just need to find some way to kind of increase the viability of these two golems. I don't think what they've done has accomplished that. And the only other change I would like to see is Mage Necros just be a little bit more viable. Like the Mage Skeletons, they buff the damage, but they're still horrible. They just don't kill anything. So largely, the Necro's in a great place, but these changes, I'm going to give like 4 out of 10. But I do think that everything else is probably why they haven't spent too much time here. But the Necro is already in a really good place, so it's not like the Necro was struggling to the same extent that a Summon Druid was. So it's, again, probably why there wasn't really much talked about here. But yeah, not a lot going on for the Necro. So now we have the ultimate kingpin of Diablo 2 to cover, the Paladin. A lot of things have been tweaked. Now, some people were upset, and I was reading some feedback on other content creators' videos where they think that the Paladin is already like the #1 guy. He's already the best, the kingpin. Why do they need to improve him? But I do think that there's a lot of aspects that could be addressed and looked at, and I think that that is what we're seeing in these patch notes. So the first thing that I want to cover is the 3 offensive auras, Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, and Holy Shock. Now, I died on the hill that I did not think the Dragon and the other stuff was overpowered. And it was so disappointing for me to see those changes in the radius of the different offensive auras completely nuked, because I thought that it was a really cool idea, and then to just completely throw it in the garbage from a blown out of proportion players 1 cow farming build really sucked. But it looks like they reverted that, which is really cool. With the big difference, instead of it being scaling, it just looks like it's 100%, 100%, 100%, and then right when you're in melee range, it just switches to 200%. So I like this. They did revert the fire synergy buffs. So I think there's some potential there to mess around with some cool stuff like Grief and Phoenix, teleport with offensive aura skillers for Holy Fire. You'll always have the Tesladin, you'll have the Oradin. The only kind of bummer here is the Holy Freeze Paladin. Now, I haven't had a chance to test it. They did add the scaling radius so you get that 200% damage, but Holy Freeze didn't get a damage buff, so the damage output is just not there, other than maybe some weird like farming in level 85 area on players 1 where there's no cold immunes. So kind of a bummer that there's nothing been addressed for Holy Freeze. Thorns now deals flat damage, but also returns an additional % damage taken when an enemy hits you. I didn't test Thorns in the original PTR. This will be cool to test now. Maybe a Thorns Paladin actually works. Can't really speak out to that because I didn't test it originally. I just know it sucks in LOD. And the same thing with this scaling damage range for Sanctuary. Now, the big game changer here is Holy Bolt in Fist of Heavens. It now damages the undead and demons. That is huge. I am 100% going to rock a Fist of Heavens Paladin or Foden, whatever you want to call it, at the start of ladder. You might be wondering why. Well, you're now not going to be struggling as demons. If you rock the Conviction Aura on your Paladin, you don't have to worry about Infinity Mercenary. You can get Insight Mercenary with a Might Aura, and then you can rock a Conviction Aura. You'll have lots of damage from your lightning. And then the Holy Bolts will damage everything. And then the Paladin has amazing mobility with charge, so you don't need Enigma. You're not as reliant on it. So I really like these changes. I'm super excited about the Paladin. Also doesn't use kind of your standard gear. Like there's a unique scepter that gives you +4 to Fist of Heavens. You don't have to go for really high breakpoint because there's that 0.4 second cooldown duration on Fist of Heavens. Really excited for it. So overall, I'm going to give the Paladin changes 9.5 out of 10. And lastly, we have the Sorceress with one lonely change. They reduced the mana cost. Nova now starts at 13 instead of 15. So this will improve initial playthroughs. It's actually made the Sorceress very powerful. Like I used to always recommend playing Fireball early on, But now the fact that static synergizes Nova and it has reduction in mana cost, pretty much that is the ultimate leveling spec. And I have covered the new damage synergy changes to Nova for endgame setup. That's also very viable. So Sorceress in a great place. A lot of good improvements now with cooldowns between each skill not relying on each other, so you can like spam Frozen Orb right after Blizzard, that kind of thing. But eventually, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we'll remove the cooldown on Frozen Orb. Just like, please give us that so we can rock a straight Frozen Orb setup. Other than that, there's not really anything to talk about, so I don't know, like 2 out of 10 because there's nothing really to discuss. But now jumping into Mercenaries, gonna quickly run through these 3. Now, the Rogue Archer, they're now gonna let you use Amazon bows, and you will gain plus Amazon skill bonuses from your gear. So this on paper might look insane, like you might be like, oh my god, that's gonna be so much extra damage. In reality, it's not, because if you have, say, a +3 to Grand Matron bow base, and you roll the Rumored Ice in it, those 3 skills, they're not synergized skills, so you're not really going to be adding that much extra damage to Freezing Arrow. Now, with that being said, it does provide like the freedom of, if you wanted to roll 1 Faith, like Faith is pretty expensive, Jaw, Ohm, Lem, and Eld, you can now roll that in, say, a Grand Matron bow, and you can now use it on Rogue Archer or an Amazon. So it is a quality of life improvement. Is it going to buff up the damage? Very minimally, in my opinion, so I don't think it's going to change much in terms of meta, because I do like the crowd control from Freezing Arrow. I just feel like the damage isn't there. They should only be spamming Freezing Arrow, not alternating between a regular shot, a Cold Arrow, and Freezing Arrow. So that's what I would like to see addressed in the future. Nothing too crazy for the Rogue Archer. Now, the Iron Wolf, they did actually originally have this redemption aura thing here, and apparently that was like just typed in wrong. I would love to see some auras added to the Iron Wolf, and actually redemption aura is not a bad idea if you were to add it to all 3 of them, because it's not going to benefit you, but it will help with their survivability, because that's one thing. Every other mercenary, so Act 2, 1, and 5, you can get some sort of life leech. Iron Wolf doesn't have that, so if you were to give them a redemption aura, they could at least redeem corpses and would have a little bit better survivability. But I have covered these guys in a previous video. The damage output is not there. The fire enchant is kind of nice. The static is okay. The crowd control from cold is alright. There's just better variants everywhere, so I'm not really excited about those. What I am super excited about is the introduction of an Act 5 Barbarian that now can dual wield one-handed weapons. So this gives so many different combinations. Like, I'm going to talk about 5 off the top of my head, and again, let me know if there's more that I'm kind of missing, but the first thing that jumped over here is they now gain plus skill bonuses from gear. So something like Ariat's Face will be beneficial. And in addition to that, some of these new mercenaries can now use Frenzy and Iron Skin in addition to Taunt. So the fact that you can dual wield weapons is going to cover a couple combinations. So if you were to run Eth, Head Striker with Lawbringer, that's the powerful option with Decrepify. Really expensive setup, Lawbringer, and Last Wish. You'll get Life Tap procs, Decrep procs, Crushing Blow, and Sanctuary Aura. Could run Dual Plague. So if you wanted to really guarantee your chance of proccing lower res, Dual Plague. You could go Grief and Death. You could go Dual Grief. You could go... you probably wouldn't want to go Breath of the Dying, but anyways, you get the point here. There was a lot of really cool different combinations. Even that kind of Grief Death that might be like pushing it a little bit, but you could go Grief and a Phase Blade with Lawbringer. There's just a lot of different combinations. Now imagine if they ever in the future, because I'm going to cover Rumors in a second here, they're going to shift some of the bases you can make Rumors in. Imagine if you could rock Beast and a Sword. You could have a Last Wish, Beast, Act 5 Mercenary. That would be a meta game-changing over the Act 2 Mercenary. So they mentioned here at the bottom, just let me scroll down a little bit, that their goal is to increase the viability of selecting other mercenaries. So I think they've gone quite a far way here with the Act 5 Mercenary. I still think they need to go farther with the other ones, but this is definitely another step forward. But let's just, I don't know, crack the whip, and maybe like the next ladder we'll get some even more substantial changes to buff them. But definitely I think the 2 Kingpin Mercenaries are now going to be the Act 5 Mercenary and the Act 2. So overall, pretty solid changes, and I would give it 7 out of 10. So rounding out the end of the video, going to quickly touch on rune words, some general updates and bug fixes, and some new level area monster updates. So in terms of rune words, this is probably worthy of its own video, and I think I will in the future make one. But you can now make plague and claws and daggers in addition to swords. So I kind of wish we could have made it in maces, because imagine 3 to Fist of Heavens base, and then you roll plague in it for a Foden. But claws is a massive improvement. Claws of Thunder, martial arts sin setup, are also traps in setup, like dual claws, dual plague, proccing lower res, and also dropping your lightning traps everywhere with a fitting mercenary. That will be a huge damage upgrade. Now, Infinity, Obedience, and Pride being used in spears and Amazon spears, this is an improvement. I think Obedience is cool. I think Pride is kind of cool. Like maybe like Warpike Pride might be cool, or same with Obedience, but the big game changer here, in my opinion, is Infinity and Spears for a couple of reasons. One is it provides you a couple other choices on an Act 2 Mercenary. So a Warpike rolling Infinity would be really cool, or a Man-Catcher rolling Infinity would also be very cool. Man-Catcher has a base attack speed of -20, so it's super fast. Warpike hits super hard. But here's where things get even more interesting. Imagine Infinity in an Amazon Spear for Charge Strike and Lightning Strike. So no longer will Lightning and Fury maybe be the kingpin. That Conviction Aura on your Amazon itself, plus the additional negative res from Infinity, that might make Lightning Strike equal or better option than Lightning Fury. But that in its own, I think, is meta shifting. So that is super exciting. I'm very kind of pumped about the new rumor changes. Again, I'll make my own dedicated video on the rumors specifically. Updates to the level area and monster, they're basically just increasing the monster density of the new areas. I did do a tier list of all the new level 85 areas, and I don't think it's going to change much with the monster density, although I think it'll just improve some of the areas that I said were the best, like the Arakin's Lair and the Stony Tomb. Those will be even better with the updates. Now, there's been a couple kind of general bug fixes here. I'm not going to cover everything, but some of the key ones here. The fact that for single players, when you set the difficulty to a certain, like players 3, 5, or 7, it's now going to remain consistently. You don't need to retype it for every game. So that's huge for the single player crowd. They did make some improvements to summons, their AI and mercenaries teleporting to you, just trying to improve that a little bit better. That's good. They did fix the fire enchant bug in Nightmares, so that's going to be really good for hardcore players. I mean, there's some other miscellaneous stuff here about graphics fixes and that kind of thing. But one massive thing here, again, you guys can read through all these, there's too many to cover, but they fixed the bugged seal in Chaos Sanctuary that you sit and click over and over again and never activates. That is fixed. That is amazing. That is probably the best bug fix in this blog post. But devs, if you're watching this, you're probably not because it's so far in the video. But bro, mana burn fix. Are we ever going to get a mana burn fix? But that covers this video in its entirety, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Just kind of like my honest feedback on everything. Again, I think this is a massive step forward. If we can just push a little bit further in a couple areas down the road, like a couple additional rune words, loot filter, I would love to see the cooldown removed on Frozen Orb, buff the other mercenaries a little bit more, maybe change some of the rune words that can be made in other bases for some more versatility. Mage Necro maybe getting a buff. I think we're in an amazing place. And then maybe if we could ever get a mapping system. I feel like the base is already there, like when you spawn an Uber Tristram portal. Why not just make a droppable that spawns like those 3 areas first, like the Izzy, Lilith, Duriel, and then just be able to roll different monster types. Just start like that as your base map function, and then maybe expand the maps a little bit. That would be kind of like a pipeline down the future, just wishing for stuff. I know D4 is coming out, and that might affect other things, but overall, really excited to see this. This is such a turnaround from the first PTR. Super excited. I would love to know what your guys' feedback is in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, if you watched it all the way in, if you could throw a like on it, help spread it through YouTube, that would be amazing. And I'll catch you guys on my next video or live stream. Peace out.